Welcome to episode 2 of my restorative gardening course. I'm so excited to have you here. And in today's video, I'm going to be walking us through how to grow potatoes. Now, if this is the first video that you're joining for, my name is Jordan. I founded a company called Mind and Soil with the hope and intention of introducing 1 million individuals to gardening's mental health benefits. So not only am I hoping to help you grow a beautiful and bountiful garden, but one that also brings you peacefulness and joy and restoration throughout your days and weeks. And so if you haven't checked out any of the previous videos in either season 1 or season 2, I really encourage you to do so because I go through certain topics such as how to plan your garden, how to start seeds indoors, how to be growing broccoli and other crops. And so there's gonna be lots of learning, lots of value all throughout those videos as well. I encourage you to check it out when the time is right for you. But for today's video, I'm gonna be entirely focused on how to go about growing potatoes. And I want you to take a look at this harvest that I had last season from just 3 seed potatoes that I planted. And the best part about this was that I knew going into the season that this was probably going to be a really great harvest. The reason why is because it's the culmination of 3 to 4 years of experimenting, playing around with different variables to figure out what exactly do potatoes need to grow to their fullest potential. And so my hope with this video is to not only help you grow beautiful potatoes, but also to save you 3 to 4 years of experimenting and trials and errors that I've taken on. So let me take care of the heavy lifting on that front so that you can just be focused on getting your hands dirty and enjoying your time in the garden. And so the way that I'm gonna break things down today are into 7 steps for growing potatoes. And the very first step that we need to get started with is to prep your soil. Now, when it comes to growing potatoes, the soil that you plant them in makes a huge difference on how well they grow. And so it really begs the question, what's the best soil to be growing potatoes in? And so a couple of years ago, I actually ran an experiment where I set up 3 different raised beds and I put a unique soil into each one of those beds. In the very first bed, I filled it up with 100% compost. This is gonna serve as kind of like my no-dig, no-till environment, really high in organic matter and really loose as a medium, which potatoes would absolutely love to be growing in. Now in the second bed right beside it, I filled this one up with a combination of 75% compost and 25% vermiculite. This is a blend that I've used in some other areas in my garden and it's performed really well. So I really wanted to get it involved in this experiment to see how it would do. And the vermiculite is added because it does a really great job of retaining moisture, keeping a lot of moisture in that growing area. And potatoes, they require a ton of water, ton of moisture to grow and produce those beautiful spuds that we want to be harvesting. So I was curious to see how this one would be performing. And then in the third and final bed of this experiment, I worked with a soil scientist to find out how she would recommend going about amending it. And what I ended up doing was adding about 6 inches of compost to that area. And then I rototilled that into the top 6 inches of native soil in my backyard to create a blend of about 50% compost and 50% native soil. This one I was really interested in because it's not using any other inputs really than just compost and the soil that was already available to me in my backyard. So after I had established those 3 soils, I then planted 3 seed potatoes into each one of these beds and I kept every variable the exact same. They were planted at the same depth with the same amendments. They got the same amount of sun, the same amount of water. Every variable was the exact same except for the soil that they were planted in. But then I allowed them to simply grow for the remainder of the season until it was time to harvest them. And at that point in time, all 3 of them grew well. However, there was one of the blends that significantly outperformed the others. So the 100% compost bed yielded a total of 1.7 kilograms or 3.7 pounds of potatoes, which is a great harvest. Moving on to the 50% compost and 50% native soil bed, it yielded a total of 2.4 kilograms of potatoes or 5.4 pounds. So even better than the 100% compost bed. But lastly, the bed that was 75% compost and 25% vermiculite yielded a huge 3.1 kilograms of potatoes or 7 pounds of potatoes from just the 3 seed potatoes that I planted. So as you get ready to plant your potatoes, my recommendation would be to plant them into a mixture or a soil blend that's 75% compost and 25% vermiculite. Again, everything that I've grown in that bed has performed really, really well, and now I can see it with the actual results from this experiment. And I think that there's really three reasons for why this has performed extremely well. The first is that the compost is extremely high in nutrients and microbial life, which allows the potatoes to really absorb and uptake all of those nutrients and then put it out in the form of growth. The second piece is that it's a really loose medium that we're growing them in, which allows for the potato tubers to shoot out and begin growing the spuds, whereby they're not confined or constricted in any way, shape, or form. They're able to really put on tons of growth. And then the third and final piece is that with that vermiculite, it does a really amazing job of retaining and holding on to moisture, which allows for these potato plants to just suck all of that up and put it into the form of both foliage and spud growth beneath the surface. And so those are the three reasons why I think that soil blend performs extremely well. And with the soil taken care of, we are on to step 2, which is timing. And this is another area where I take a little bit of a different approach to most gardeners or most recommendations that you'll find on the internet. And that's because a lot of those recommendations online are going to encourage you to start your potatoes right around your last frost date, so fairly early on in the season. And the reason why is because potatoes are very hardy. They're going to be able to grow in cooler conditions. However, are those the best conditions for them to be growing in to ultimately yield the largest harvest of potatoes? Well, this is something that I was also curious about. So once again, I designed a little experiment. So on April 2nd, which is a couple weeks before my last frost date, I decided to plant a set of potatoes. And that did feel early to me, but again, a lot of the resources online were encouraging me to start them nice and early. So then out of curiosity, 60 days later, at the beginning of June, I planted another crop of potatoes. Exact same variety, exact same soil. The only difference being that these were planted 60 days later. Now, just before I show you the harvest from each of these two plantings and the difference in it, I want to first show you the difference in temperatures during each of these growing windows. So for those potatoes that I planted on April 2nd, over the course of April, the average temperature was 13 Celsius. And then for May, it was 15 Celsius. And then lastly, in June, their last month of growing, it climbed to 18 Celsius. But then for the potatoes that I planted at the beginning of June, it was also 18 Celsius. But then for July, that climbed to 24 Celsius. And for August, it climbed all the way up to an average temperature of 27.5 Celsius. So clearly the potatoes that were planted in June had a way warmer growing window with way more sun in there. But what impact did that have on the harvest? Well, for those potatoes that I planted on April 2nd, they only yielded a measly 1.4 pounds of potatoes. Absolutely terrible. But then for those potatoes that I planted on June 2nd, that I got to grow all through the summertime, they yielded a huge 6.9 pounds of potatoes from just those few seed potatoes that I planted. So when it comes to the timing for when you plant your potatoes, don't be afraid to plant them a little bit later on in the year. I've been getting really, really great results with that, and I start all of my potatoes now a little bit later as a result of those findings. However, if you're not convinced, then I totally encourage you to run a little experiment where maybe you plant some early and another set a little bit later. And this experimental mindset, it's really how I've learned everything that I now know in the garden. And on top of that, what's so great about it is that it's a really fun, really playful way to go about gardening. It totally alleviates the pressure of bounty or harvest or yield and allows you to focus all of your time and energy on things that are within your control. And the best part about it is at the end of every one of those experiments, you've got a learning, a little new nugget of information that you're going to be so excited to apply into the following gardening season. So as a result, it creates even more excitement for that next planting, that next year of gardening, and it's going to pull you further and further into the garden. So really encourage you to take that experimental mindset and to begin utilizing it in the garden. And that brings us on to step number 3, which is to chit your potatoes, or in other words, simply to sprout your potatoes before you plant them. So the first thing that you need to do on this front is to buy your potatoes from a nursery or a garden center. And the reason why you wouldn't want to necessarily necessarily use ones from the grocery store is because a lot of the time they are sprayed with a sprouting inhibitor, which is going to prevent new growth from coming off of that potato plant, which increases the shelf life for them. But when you go to a nursery or to a garden center, those are seed potatoes, nothing on them, fully organic, and they will begin to grow. So once you've purchased your seed potatoes from a garden center or nursery, you want to put them into a warm and dark environment for 2 to 3 weeks before you plant them. This room should be about 70 Fahrenheit or 20 Celsius, and over the course of this 3-week period, you're going to notice little new sprouts of growth emerging on these potato plants out of their eyes. And this little bit of initial growth is actually the beginning of our potato stem that's going to push through the soil and then ultimately turn into foliage to absorb the sun's energy and develop the potatoes beneath the surface. So by chitting your potatoes, we're essentially just fast tracking the gardening season by a couple of weeks and ensuring that every seed that we plant is ultimately going to grow into a potato. So with your potatoes now sprouting and beginning to grow, we are ready for step number 4, which is to plant your seed potatoes. And where we plant them in the garden and the way that we go about planting them is going to make a huge impact on how well they grow. So the first piece that we need to determine is where in the garden do we want to plant our potatoes. And potatoes love a full sun environment. The more sun that the potatoes get, the bigger that they're going to grow, the bigger the harvest or the yield is going to be for you. And so what I would encourage you to do is if you want to get a really great harvest of potatoes, then go ahead and plant those in a part of your yard that gets the absolute most sun. And that might mean that you have to move some of your other crops such as tomatoes or peppers or squashes, cucumbers, zucchinis into another area that isn't quite as sunny. But if getting a big potato harvest is the priority for you, then we want to prioritize that really sunny space for them. Now, once you've determined where in the garden you want to go about planting them, the next thing that we want to do is to plant them deep. So for myself personally, I plant my potatoes 8 inches deep. I go really far down, and the reason why is because new spuds or potatoes are only going to grow and develop off the portion of the stem that's buried. Therefore, if we plant the potatoes only 2 or 3 inches deep, well then there's only 1 to 2 inches of stem for new potato spuds to be growing off of. However, if we plant them say 8 inches deep, there's now 7-8 inches for that stem to grow through, which will then create 7 to 8 inches for new spuds and potatoes to be growing off of. So after the first hole is dug, I'm then just going to measure up 12 inches, and then I'm going to dig my next transplant hole. Once again, that hole is going to be 8 inches deep, and I'm going to continue at these 12-inch intervals for the rest of the row or the space that I'm planting and looking to grow. And now once I have all of the holes dug, I don't want to just throw the potato in there. I want to add some nutrition and some amendments into that transplant hole so the potato has everything that it needs to grow to its fullest potential. So the first thing that I do is I grab 1 handful of worm castings and I put that into the transplant hole. Next thing that I do is I grab 1 tablespoon of organic fertilizer such as our 444 superfood, and I place that into the transplant hole. I'm then going to just kind of like massage that in lightly so that it gets worked into the soil there, and then I'm going to grab my seed potato and I'm going to make sure that one of the eyes that has sprouted and beginning to put on growth is pointed up so that it can grow vertically straight up and break through the soil where it will begin to put on its foliage growth. Once that is in there, I simply backfill with the surrounding soil, give it a nice big drink of water, and they have everything that they need in order to begin growing. Alrighty, so that's 4 steps down, which means we've got 3 remaining, and the beauty of potatoes is that these last 3 steps are super easy, super straightforward, because the plant pretty much runs on autopilot from this point. We don't need to be doing any pruning, any trellising, just a couple of things to allow them to grow to their fullest potential. And so step number 5 is to hill up your potatoes. And so after about 2 to 3 weeks of planting your potatoes, you're going to notice the first signs of growth coming through the surface and a little bit of foliage beginning to poke out. When this happens, what we're going to do is hill them up. And all that this consists of is grabbing 3 to 4 inches of compost and putting that directly over top of that new growth that's emerging. Now you might be wondering, like, why are we burying the plant that just broke through the surface? Well, remember, the more stem that's buried, the more potatoes we'll end up harvesting. And so by covering it with another 3 to 4 inches of compost, we've just created another 3 to 4 inches of buried stem for new potatoes to be growing off of. And that in turn is going to once again be increasing our yield, our harvest of potatoes. So that's all for step number 5, which brings us to step number 6, and that is watering your potatoes. Now, the biggest recommendation that I can make to you on this front is to set up a DIY irrigation system. It might sound a little bit complex at first glance, but trust me, believe me in this, it is so simple, so easy, so straightforward to set up. And once you have that done, not only is it going to save you so much time, but it's going to ensure that your plants are getting a way better, way more consistent watering than by going through it by hand. And so I've got a full video that walks you through step by step how to set up a DIY irrigation system. Believe me, once you give it a try, you're gonna wonder, how did I ever go about watering the garden before this? So once you have it set up, what I like to do is then take some of the feeder line and one of the watering spikes and place that right at the base of my potato plants. The reason why I do this is because it allows me to then run this watering setup at a very low pressure, and that ensures that all of the water, all of the moisture is getting right down into the root zone for those potatoes and not being sprayed and wasted or being inefficient in any capacity. And once I have it set up, I then let it run for 20 minutes every 2 days, and I would utilize that as a bit of a rule of thumb for yourself or a starting point, and then either water more frequently or less frequently based on whether you're getting really hot and dry weather or potentially some rainy and cooler weather. I'm always kind of tweaking and adjusting, but I start from a place of 20 minutes every 2 days. Now, if setting up a DIY irrigation system isn't in the cards for you, then I would encourage you to go about hand watering. And the way that you're going to go about doing this is every 2 days, go out to your potato plants, and with the hose, you're going to water the area where they're planted until you see the water beginning to pool. Once you see it beginning to pool, move on to the next plants or the next row and water that area until it pools as well. And then once you've gone through the area that you're looking to water, come back to where you started, where the water was originally pooling. It will have now worked its way into the soil, and do a second round just like this. So water the area for a second round until it begins to pool, and then move on to the next area. And the reason why we do this is because by doing multiple rounds, it allows the water time to slowly work its way into the seedling mix. If we did it all at once, as soon as it begins to pool, that water is going to try to escape, which usually means running off the side of the bed and not actually getting down into the soil. So by watering by hand in multiple rounds, it's going to give your plants much more water in the area that they need in order for them to begin putting it to use. And so with step 6 done, we've got our plants watering, they're growing super well. We are on to our 7th and final step for today, which is harvesting your potatoes, the moment we've all been waiting for. And you're probably wondering, like, when do I know that it's time to harvest my potatoes? And there's 2 signs that you want to be looking for. The first are the potato flowers, and these are going to emerge on the plant after about 60 to 70 days. There's nothing that we need to do with them. They are poisonous when they turn into potato berries, so don't eat them, but it's a really good indicator or sign that the plant is getting close to full maturity and ready to be harvested. So once you see the potato flowers and potato berries, you could begin harvesting some of your potato plants, and that's going to result in kind of like an earlier and slightly smaller harvest, but you get to start enjoying some of the fruits of your labor. However, if you want to maximize your harvest and get the absolute biggest harvest possible, then the second thing that you can be waiting for is for each of the plants to begin yellowing and browning and dying back. And so for myself, I personally wait until the plants have pretty much entirely died off, because as long as there is still green growth on those plants, they're still absorbing energy from the sun and developing the spuds beneath the surface. But once it is fully yellow and brown, that's when I then go ahead and start harvesting those plants. And so to do so, we need to be a little bit careful, and we want to start away from the stem so that we don't puncture any of the potatoes that are now beneath the surface. So for myself, I start about 1 foot off of the main stem, and I just use my hands rather than a shovel or a pitchfork because I don't want to puncture any of these potatoes. And I simply begin begin digging down all the way to 8 to 12 inches deep for where those potatoes might be living, and simply begin working through the soil and finding the beautiful little nuggets that have been growing into beautiful potato spuds. And I really encourage you to harvest through a pretty large area, because these can really spread out and be growing in all kinds of different areas. So make sure that you're nice and thorough on this so that you get as many of those potato babies out of the garden for you. And I've got zero doubt that if you've utilized all the 7 steps and the tips along the way that I've shared in this video, that you are going to have an absolutely beautiful potato harvest. One last piece of information for you is that if you are interested, I do have another video all focused on how to go about storing your potatoes once you've harvested them. And when you utilize this method of storing them, they're going to stay good for a good 4 to 5 months after you harvest them, without any signs of going bad, anything along those lines. So check out that video as another way to just continue building your gardening knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of the gardening world. But folks, that's everything that I wanted to cover off on for today. Hope that this has been valuable. You've got all the information that you need to grow beautiful potatoes. So now just get out there and go get those hands dirty. See you on the next episode.